month, which is dedicated to our gender and sexuality component. We have a variety of fights that we've been involved in, involving PRAs PRAs in collaboration with US Pros, as well as updates about our Pride event, or no, Pride and Policing event. I'm gonna hand it over. Oh, let's go over our principal actually. Do we have this share screen option?
Yes, Kim.
Okay, let me pull this up. Okay. Okay, so today we're going to talk about how under the settler colony, our autonomy has and will always be under attack. The Roe v. Wade is another reminder of how the state continues to police gender and sexuality. And today we'll be having a collective conversation to strategize our rebellion. Again, this is a gender and sexuality component, and we meet every first Tuesday of the month. So we'll be here next August as well. We have a variety of statement of principles, as well as our principle scene that is available on our website. And each meeting we like to start with a grounding principle. So this week, Nee and the rest of our beautiful organizing committee chose a commitment to support and fund community defense and building a culture of resistance. So we will engage in collective learning with our communities about the state apparatus for surveillance, criminalization, and counterinsurgency. We will resist and support non-compliance with laws, policies, procedures, and actions that violate our community's right to live dignified lives, such as any registries based on race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, or religion, invasions of privacy and/or searches or seizures, and any and all deportations, detentions, and incarcerations, ACAB. So with that principle in mind, I wanted to hand it over to Hamid before we do a check-in, just so Hamid could go over logistics.
Thank you, Kim. So just very briefly, because of Zoom bombing and other disruptions, what we have done is, but folks first joined in, they are muted. So if you want to make a comment, please, there's a raise hand function when you hit at the bottom of the screen and it says reactions. So then there'll be different functions that pop up. Amongst them is raise hand, or please feel free to send a message by chat or post your question to the host or co-host, and they'll be doing that too. And the chat is also open to only hosts and co-hosts. But as we go along, we will see how everything is going. And, obviously this is going to be a collective conversation. Then we can collectively decide if we want to open up all the mics, and so people don't have to go through. So that was it. Thank you.
I do this for a living, so you would think that I'd be so used to like screen share and all that, but I'm not. I wanted to start off our conversation with a check-in question. So if we could go around, do maybe a short introduction of our name, pronoun, and what brought us here today. And the check-in question, since we will be talking about the autonomy of our bodies, is what is an action where your body feels at its best, I guess. And I could go first. So my name is Kim. I use she, they pronouns. I work with Stop LAPD Spying and the Gender and Sexuality group. And I love being in water, and I don't know how to swim. So I just kind of like float around and like linger. But it's the best feeling ever. I love being close to water, in water, in a bath, anywhere. And I could popcorn to Hamid.
I feel I love water, but I also love when I'm cooking. So my proximity to the food that I'd be making for myself for dinner or any other meal, just that's really a good way to both bond with the surrounding and with myself as well. So thank you for asking. And I can popcorn it to Matios.
Hey folks, my name is Matias. I use he, him pronouns with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And I feel best when I'm like in the middle of a good run, like I'm not tired yet, I'm like peak. I just feel really in tune with my body and I think more clearly and time kind of slows down. And that's when I feel best. And I will popcorn it over to Naoko. And if you're not comfortable unmuting, that's fine. You can type your response in the chat.
Hi, I'm Naoko. I use she, they pronouns. Like Kim, I really like being in the water and swimming. And I'll popcorn it to Yuko.
I think mics may be muted for folks. So if they want to post their responses in chat, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Yuko. I use she, her pronouns. I feel best when I'm sparring in Taekwondo. I feel like I have a lot of control and I enjoy that feeling. And I'll popcorn it to Tiff.
Yeah, hi folks, thanks. My name is Tiff. I use they, them pronouns with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And I also love the feeling of running. I love running at night, especially when it's cool and when it's quiet. And I will popcorn to C.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't unmute myself. Hello, everyone. I go by C. You see they pronouns, and I'm a water sign, and I love water too. But particularly like at night, I like to float backwards and like stare at the stars, and that's just like I feel like weightless and like it's pretty awesome. Yeah, especially like summer nights like these and stuff. Yeah. I'll popcorn to Anna.
Hello. I think it's kind of windy where I am, so I'll try to be quicker. My body feels really lovely in the sun, so I try to spend as much time as I can outside. Popcorn. Has Victor gone?
They shared their response, excuse me, in the chat. So hi, I'm Victor. He, him pronouns fit me best. Also continuing on the water feeling, swimming feels best, but I don't do it. Like, it's hard to swim. It's bodies of water are inaccessible. Well, for poor people purposely. Anyway, pass it to Jamie. G.
Hey all, my name is Jamie. I use she, they. Let's see, I was thinking about this and I think I feel best when I'm eating. My tongue gets ignited, my belly feels good, and it's very scrumptious I don't know, and you get so many different tastes in your mouth. And I feel really grateful when I eat. So I'm gonna pass it to the other Jamie.
Solidarity between Jamies. I appreciate that. I use she, her pronouns, and my body definitely feels best. Maybe not during running, but right after for sure, especially if I'm happen to be running with my dog at the time. And I will go ahead and pass to Isabella.
Hi, my name is Isabella. I use she, her pronouns. And I feel best when I am sleeping or like laying down and allowing my body to just rest. So yeah. Oh, and I'll pass it to who hasn't gone yet. Tiff, have you gone?
Yes, I believe they have. Lyle hasn't gone.
Oh, hi, I'm Leal. She, her, they pronouns, and I feel best in a park, picnicking, a combination of a lot of things. So like the sun and good food, maybe some music and some friends and community and all of that. I will popcorn. I'm so sorry, I don't know how to say your name, but NGHIA. I feel like I'm gonna mess it up. I would love to know how to say your name though properly. So sorry. Thank you.
You don't have to apologize. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Nia. I'm just keeping my camera off because I just got back in and I want to be off camera for a bit, but I'll turn this on. I'm Nia, pronouns she, her, they, them, or J if you're Vietnamese. And I love feeling like a really nice breeze or wind kind of just caress my body, especially on a hot day or, you know, so that's when I feel really right in my body. So thank you. I don't know who hasn't gone. If you want to put
Ryan hasn't gone.
Cool, I'll pass it to Ryan.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Hey everyone, I'm Ryan. I use he, him pronouns. And I think that when I feel most in touch with my body is when skateboarding and sort of flying around. It's sort of out of touch, but still in touch in the same way. But yeah, I'll popcorn it to Cece.
Hi, I'm Cece. I use they, them pronouns. Yeah, my body definitely feels good swimming or meditating. Yeah, anything like where I'm concentrating on my breath really helps.
I think that should be all, Kim.
Sorry, I took way too long to unmute. Okay, anyway. So with our principle being said, right? Also, thank you everyone for sharing. I really love all the responses. And I'm definitely gonna try some, maybe except for running. Me and running don't really. But anyway, abortions are always welcome here, right? And especially as we move forward in discussing our principle, right, of resisting and supporting non-compliance with laws, policies, it's important that we think about legality as not a moral obligation, right? It's just a law, and so many things were legal ones or illegal ones. So laws literally don't mean anything. Abortion's always welcome here. And Nee also provided us with some images of us to start thinking about what the surveillance looked like in the stalker state. So this is an image of the May 3rd action where there was Homeland Security present. And as we start our discussion in our webinar about the ties between surveillance, gender and sexuality, and today specifically bodily autonomy, we want to think about how on stolen land, with a history of genocide and enslavement, right? Again, we can never have full body autonomy in regards to a legal system or a political party. So throughout history, right, there's always been threats against bodily autonomy. So here we have, I think Denise said was the Jane Collective and their action against, their action in support of abortion. So keep your laws off our body, we're pro-choice, and we riot, abort the Supreme Court. So again, thinking about how this recent overturning of Roe v. Wade isn't anything new, right? But just another pattern in a cyclical journey of taking away bodily autonomy. Nee also provided with this amazing, Mariela, actually, one of our members, provided this amazing abortion scene. I don't know, Mariela, if you wanted to talk about it briefly.
I don't think Mariela is Mariela on the?
Yeah, I don't think Mariela is on this call.
Yeah.
They're about
okay.
to have that transition
Sorry.
of birthing.
I saw, yeah, Latina, their Zoom icon. So I'm like, oh my God, Mariela. But anyway, Mariela provided this amazing DIY doula self-care before, during, and after abortion, right? So a lot of these resources do exist online. And there's been networks of abortion care when, right, the state has divested any energy, any resources from abortion and bodily autonomy. So there's a lot of these zines out there. We have here a QR code if you're interested in grabbing this one. I've also seen a lot of women of color herbalists who have cautioned people in terms of using herbs for abortion right now, right? So in California, although Newsom just announced that California wouldn't change its laws on abortion and abortion rights, there's still a large concern about not only everyone else, right, in the rest of the world, but also how people are going to have to travel to California to get access to these abortions. And what does that mean locally? Right, how is that going to affect us locally, or what systems of support can we provide for people to be able to come and have abortions? But before we start that, I kind of wanted to give a context of how we got here again, right? So Roe v. Wade was codified in 1973, which allowed for the access to abortions. But before that, or before the overturning, right, there was several things that happened that don't really get talked about in terms of infringing on bodily autonomy, specifically affecting birthing people of color, right, and how birthing people of color have always faced unsafe access to reproductive choices. And the reason we say birthing people of color is because not all women birth and not all people who birth are women. So beginning with the Hyde Amendment right after Roe v. Wade was passed, 3 years after the Hyde Amendment passed, and it was passed in 1976, which blocks federal funding for abortions, right? So already we see a tax on abortions for working poor women who can't, or birthing people who can't afford abortions on their own. So inaccessibility already becomes something 3 years later, right, that already is happening. Several birth control experiments happened on women in Puerto Rico, Guatemala, all over Latin America as well, right? So the imagery and the freedom that came with birth control for white American women was at a severe cost and price to women of color who were given these, specifically the pill, also Nexplanon, which is the implant that lasts, I want to say 4 years. So all these technology advances, right, definitely came at a price, which was forced sterilization in some cases of women of color who were given this pill without actually or ethically consenting, if that makes sense. We had sterilization of women of color across the nation, more specifically and locally. We had some at the USC General Hospital. My mom would also tell me stories of how when she first gave birth to my oldest sister, I think in 1984, she didn't know any English, didn't really read Spanish, but right after giving birth, she was kind of shoved these papers to sign, right? For her to consent to having her tubes tied, even though that was her first child. And, you know, it was just based on the stigmatization of her being an immigrant working class woman who was going to this hospital, which isn't known for accepting Medicaid, right? So it's very specifically, locally, geographically affecting communities of color. Then we have sterilization in detention centers and in prisons, still going on and still happening. So we constantly see attacks on bodily autonomy, but yet this overturning of Roe v. Wade, right, in, I want to say June 24th, 2022, was really shook a lot of primarily white women, right? Because for the first time, they were experiencing what women of color and birthing people of color have always faced, which is little to no determination of what your body is free to do, right? Other determining factors around bodily autonomy and the right to have a family is family policing and separation, and also understanding how child protective services is another carceral arm of the state. And also the criminalization and or sometimes sterilization of pregnant people who use drugs. It's still happening through a lot of nonprofits that claim to do, you know, work of cleaning up pregnant people who use drugs, but a lot of times it pushes people to take birth control that they do not want to take, and goes even as far as criminalizing people who use drugs, right? And if anything were to happen to the fetus while the person was using drugs, they would face a murder charge. Dorothy Roberts has this really wonderful article about that, and a whole book where she talks about race, reproduction, and the meaning of liberty. It's a quick plug-in. But just to go back a slide, I wanted to emphasize the lens in which we're using, right? Reproductive rights is often the only language that we have, at least in the mainstream politic, of pro-abortion, right? Or it's focused on legal battles and challenges to keep the legalization of abortion. Over the years, several legislation has passed across the nation tackling such rights, and now it's overturned. So reproductive rights is the term that we use when folks are solely invested in protecting abortion, versus reproductive justice, which is the language that was developed with Loretta Ross, who is a very important Black woman and figure in the reproductive justice circles and organizing. Particularly, I want to say she's based in Atlanta. So reproductive justice is the complete physical, mental, spiritual, political, social, and economic well-being of women and girls based on full achievement and protection of women's human rights. Reproductive justice, the right to not have a child, and the right to have a child and to raise them with dignity in safe, healthy, and supportive environments, right? So we need to think about a reproductive justice lens, because for birthing people of color, and always the most marginalized, right? We've never really had a choice in which we could say, yes, I want a child and I'll be fully supported, right? With welfare, with social services that will support my decision in having a family. We've always been told, or we've always been forced, right, towards sterilization, toward abortion, toward birth control. Even the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, right, started her mission with very eugenicist ideals, and having most of her clinics being in communities of color, because she believed that you needed to stop the reproduction of unwanted populations. So abortion and birth control has always been a very sensitive, intense topic for people of color, of course, right? Because our reproductive freedom has always been called into question since genocide, enslavement. Yeah. So.
Should we open up the mics, Kim, if folks have some comments or questions? Okay. We just.
So I can talk for hours, but I don't want to because that's not fun. But I really wanted to open it up to folks and see how we could connect our current battle of access to reproductive justice with our recent action in West Hollywood, specifically titled No Pride in Policing, right? And the attacks on trans people and bodily autonomy. So yeah, what are people thinking? Was this new to anyone? Did other people's moms, right, tell them stories about sterilization and stuff?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm very new to this scene still, but you mentioned Child Protective Services in one of your slides, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Does anyone want to take this one? I know in conversations with Mariela, which is another member of our GNS collective, we've talked about, so we have this other side project called Our Data Bodies, where we discuss surveillance, particularly how it pertains to everyday life and your bodies, right? And Mariela had this amazing, well, it's always interesting talking about oppression, so it's not amazing, but very interesting lens towards thinking about child protective services and how they surveil mothers, particularly mothers who do sex work, mothers who are activists, mothers who lead a very different mothering style, if that makes sense, that oftentimes threatens, right, what we consider the normative nuclear family. So historically, Child Protective Services has very much, right, the very idea of removing a child from their home and paying somebody else to take care of said child instead of paying the actual family to take care of the child is wild. But I'm sure Hamid or Matios or anyone else has any other connections between how CPS is another carceral arm of the state.
Yeah, I just posted a report that Ramsha Sajid, who was had a brief fellowship at the coalition, they did some study on the Department of Children and Family Services in LA County to map out the information sharing that was going on and surveillance that was taking place, which includes Child Protective Services and the impact on children as a result. And then we are getting ready to release part 2 of a more sort of an expansive investigation into that. Victoria Copeland, who partnered with us along with DWAG, Downtown Women's Action Coalition, out of LA Can, and Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. So that should be coming out hopefully within the next 4 to 6 weeks. So this report kind of speaks about it. And then there is a pretty, just a movement underway as a result of the violence that happens as a result of from Child Protective Services and DCFS and the separation of families. Yeah. Matthias has his hand up.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to touch on Nico's question. And so here in LA, DCFS, the Department of Child and Family Services, is effectively the larger county entity for Child Protective Services. And there's they often infringe on like bodily autonomy of mothers in various ways. I think I've heard just from people who've been organizing around it, you know, folks who've given birth at LA County USC, like if they're Black or people of color, they're asked to drug test immediately after. And there are plenty of instances. I actually found an article here about just one experience a couple had with DCFS immediately after giving birth at LA County USC. And it really is just they kind of hold they infringe on bodily autonomy in so many different ways. Like I know another thing they kind of do is if a mother is experiencing domestic abuse and does seek out help through the police or something like that, it calls the police um, to kind of name that abuse, that you know they often will, or I think they might always separate the children if there are any in that instance. So DCFS is an incredibly violent entity. And I think even when Mariella and Kim have talked about it in the past, they do kind of frame it, and Ramsha's work I think does this too, frame it as like this kind of next iteration of settler colonial effort to separate families. And that's clear in the targeting of people of color, primarily Black families, if you look at the data.
Thank you for the resources and the answers.
I was going to add too, if I may, that like it's, you know, it's also a class issue, right? Because like it's usually poor mothers, poor parents, working class parents that are being policed by these institutions, regulated by these institutions. So I was just going to ask that it's a class issue as well.
Can I just quickly add one more thing, Kim? Yeah, so I think I also want to bring in that how that criminalization of babies continues, whether it's through Child Protective Services. So in 2016, the state of California did an audit of California gang databases. And gang databases, we've known that who really is being targeted. And going back to Nia's point, like, you know, that the class is central to that, which communities and who are designated under gang injunctions. So what that audit found was that 42 babies, like they were the underage of 3 years old, were in these gang databases. And there were 28 babies who were under the age of 1 year who were also in these gang databases as well. So I mean, that goes to show the violence of the state, that how and on so many levels and to what scale things would go to criminalizing children, and in a sense to, you know, which is again a pathway to incarceration and a whole prison, that pipeline to prison. So just wanted to share that too.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say too that I think is really salient is that these systems are also just like, you know, systems ultimately of criminalization, of data gathering, and they provide no resource, because I've had plenty of family members who ended up, children who have ended up in the hospital because the parent was unable to control their anger. And instead of being able to provide that parent with resources, the next step is to threaten the parent with incarceration, prison, or separation of the family. Because, you know, in all senses, like nobody wants a child hurt or put in the hospital because, you know, an adult was unable to control themselves. But at the same time, child separation from the parent and the loyalty and love I've seen of children who have been, you know, sexually and physically assaulted by their parent is still very, very like tangible. Like you can see it and you can feel it, and it's forever. So one thing that I've often seen in these systems is that it really is about not only the othering and the like incarceration, but it's about this promise of like safety with no actual systemic change or resource provided to people.
Thank you so much. Yeah, definitely. I just also remembered how I have a friend who does research on the way that oppositional defiance disorder gets applied to mostly Black and Latina girls who are in the foster care system. And that ultimately leads them to not get placed in family homes because this opposition defiance disorder basically, you know, tracks you and places you in like a stigmatized light as a young growing child. But when all these young girls or young children in the foster system can't be placed, most of the time they end up in juvenile hall, right? So we also have to think about how all these resources that are allocated to prisons to house children, right, to house folks, and they're all carceral solutions that don't go to the root of the problem, aren't necessarily addressing what leads parents to be frustrated, right? Because of lack of resources, because of not being able to get a living wage. Yeah, Nia?
Yes, wow. So I was just thinking like how so many things just don't change, you know, like I didn't even know that there was this disorder, you know, that was applied to a specific group of folks. But like I just think about like, you know, drapetomania, which was like a mental illness of like the 1800s, 19th century. Sorry, that's my dog. You know, where they basically pathologized like enslaved Africans, like trying to escape and trying to like free themselves from like being enslaved during antebellum. And given this this mental disorder called drapetomania, you know, and just applying it to like the LGBTQIA fight as well, right? Like gender identity disorder, or now they call it incongruency, right? A gender incongruency, just like the ways in which the institution of the medical industrial complex really shapes like and controls not just our bodies, but our minds and our spirit as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Also thinking about how a lot of cis people just kind of started thinking about, oh, they're coming for bodies, right? When anti-trans bills have been happening, have been almost a precursor to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, right? But just because they don't affect the stereotypical cis middle-class white feminist, it means that it must not affect anyone. Oh, I had something that it complete. Yes, and also going back to how the medical industrial complex is always complacent, right? Like a lot of this news or a lot of the conversations that are happening about who's gonna be right calling the cops when someone goes to ask for an abortion, or your data being mined and sold with those apps that track periods and menstrual cycles, right? So folks are now saying that Roe v. Wade, of course, protected more than just abortion, but also your bodily privacy, right? So all these apps are going to be able to sell their data to possibly anyone who is interested in whether you missed a period or not, or anyone who is interested in whether, you know, your menstrual cycle is off due to pregnancy and all these things. So it's really wild how we have technology that helps us track these things, but it's being insidiously used against us to keep track of whether we're gonna go have an abortion or not. And on that note also, I recently read this really great essay called Mutilating Gender by Dean Spade, and where he talks about how in order to receive the okay from your insurance to have I'm trying to remember the term, gender affirming surgeries. To have gender affirming surgeries, right? You need to, again, almost pathologize yourself of having this issue with your gender, if that makes sense. So you have to think about your gender as wrong, right? I feel wrong, I feel ill, and now I need gender affirming surgery, instead of critically analyzing a gender binary that was meant for people who experience enslavement, people who experience genocide, people who weren't considered human, right? Because they didn't fit into the Catholic gender binary during colonization. I feel like that was a messy transition, but anyway, it was meant to transition into me discussing the no pride in policing and no pride in detention actions that went on in LA and across. So Nee, if you're available, you could go ahead and take it away. Sorry, Nia.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking Nina. My bad. So I just got back this weekend from the Tucson. Sorry, 1 second. My dog is. I'll be right back.
So maybe just to recap, locally, we had a No Pride in Detention and No Pride in Policing event, which Chela led, and Chela's band also performed, and it was really an amazing action. Well, it was kind of bittersweet because there was a lot of white queers that just kind of shoved their way in, just very rude and also very telling, right? But the whole point of the action was to remind people that the original Pride was a riot. It wasn't this happy hand holding with police, right? Which WeHo actually made their, what's the parade person called? Their grand marshal, the captain of the sheriff's department, which is just wild and a slap in the face. But yes, Nia, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry about that. My dog was just like acting up. So I'd love to hear more about the queer apocalypse that happened. That's like amazing. And I love like the connection, no pride in policing, and then also no pride in detention, right? I just got back into town, my hometown, Sacramento right now, being in Tucson, Arizona for our No Pride in Detention action, and we ended Pride Month. I use that in air quotes because like we really want to push Pride to go beyond just like June, right? Because like Stonewall never really ended. It doesn't end, it just continues, and it just gets exacerbated. But we ended our No Pride in Detention campaign in Arizona because in Arizona there are, as you know, there are 300 plus anti-LGBTQIA legislations that have come through and being passed around on a legislative level. These are the ways this is death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? This is the reason why we're here now with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, right? It's these little things that on a legislative level that the system is trying to push out and change the laws and the systems. And so in Arizona, they have the most anti-LGBTQIA legislation. And so we ended our No Pride in Detention action in Tucson, Arizona. So many different LGBTQIA immigrant rights leaders flew in from different parts of the country to host a action at beginning at the library in Tucson and then marching to the immigration office over there, right? And Tucson, the energy was like different because I don't think the police knew, not that they didn't know what they were doing, I just felt like to see this type of resistance in the street wasn't common for them, or it wasn't a typical thing, right? And so like the energy and the spirit was powerful. It was wonderful to see so many local Tucson folks just organizing, and there's definitely a need. The resistance and the struggle is there. I'm just so moved by that, but like also to really continue, like I really hope that Pride continues beyond June month, right? Or just the summer month, like that. We continue to struggle and we continue to fight and resist those neoliberal pride corporate ideas, right? Rainbow capitalist pride. Because we find that this does happen in so many instances, right? Where they liberalize and just really take out the revolutionary spirit of movements that came out of that, right? Like, and just to harken back to Stonewall and the Compton cafeteria riots and the Black Cat and all of those movements that like came about because of what the state did back then, how they would regulate on our bodies, right? I think about Stonewall and how those ordinances in New York City about really regulating on gender and how people dressed, right? There were the ordinances that revealed that police really took advantage of, right? If you were a man or a woman that presented yourself in 3 articles of clothing that was the opposite of what you were wearing, that gave grounds for New York NYPD to do horrific things to your body, right? And that led to that rebellion that happened on the night of June 28th, 1969, in which they rioted and they protested until June 2nd, right? And they began to go out into the street and they began to resist and fight to have bodily autonomy, just to even dress yourself, right? And it continues on today. And these movements are all connected with one another. They're all tied to one another. And the thing about liberal capitalism is that they really love to atomize us and like really separate us like on an individual level, and that our fight is an individual personal issue, when all of it is all tied into this bigger beast of a machine, an institution of a system that is violently harming our people. So it was such a wonderful experience to be out there in Sacramento. This Sunday, we're having our No Pride in Detention and No Pride in Policing action happening. So we're continuing on with this. This is moving forward. Sorry, I've talked my head off. If you have questions, let me know.
Thank you so much, Nia. When you were talking about the articles of clothing, it just reminded me about how SB 357 was just signed, which it's now law and will go into effect January 1st, that it will be no longer a crime to loiter for the purpose of committing prostitution in California, and people convicted or facing charges for that offense will be able to have their cases dismissed. And this SB 357 is a huge, right, it's still reform, but it's also very much reducing how primarily Black trans women were being criminalized, specifically in the Figueroa corridor. And I hate the language that's used of like non-sex workers were also being attacked, right? When I feel like we should always center the most marginalized. So we should care that sex workers were being, targeted. And although, yes, there's sex working, right? We don't believe in prison and policing anyway. But anyway, before SB 357 or still until January, right? And it'll probably still happen because all of these laws really rely on the discretion of cops who are on the ground, right? But SB 357 will now no longer have trans Black women being incarcerated or at least criminalized solely for just loitering, right? Or just standing in a street corner. Nia, you wanted?
Yeah, I totally forgot to mention this, and I feel like this is like a very critical point that that we should talk about, and that is these like 300 plus anti-LGBT legislations that have been coming out. I believe that these legislations are directly tied to the anti-immigration legislations, the carceral legislations, the just those racist bills, right? Like, and these legislation, these bills that are being passed is the work of an organization called ALEC. I don't know if anyone has heard of them, but it's the American Legislative Exchange Council. They are nonprofit lobbying, even though they say that they're not lobbying, right? But they are a mega site of where these laws are being created and signed, and they're like just, I don't know if you've seen that film 13th, right? Where they talk about a lot of the carceral, prison, industrial, like school to prison pipeline, all of these like legislations that have come out. Like for instance, Trayvon Martin's case with the Stand Your Ground, right, in Florida. Those were also being passed all over the United States as well, right? And that was the work of ALEC, just like they are doing now with these anti-LGBT legislations. And what is more disgusting is that these corporations that put rainbows every Pride season, they also give money to ALEC to write these anti-LGBT legislations. And if you didn't catch what I was throwing down, that's basically them laughing in our face that we are out celebrating these corporations, right? Licking their boots as they are doing horrific things to us on a legislative level, right? Because the police, this is the type of policing that we don't talk about, right? How these bills, how these laws affect us, right? The cops wouldn't be able to do the things they do without these laws as well. Like that they're just they are hand in hand. And so, yes, Alex, like, so I really want to stress that, like, as we begin to organize and really mobilize, that we continue to follow organizations like ALEC and how they continually perpetuate like the system that continues to kind of bulldoze over our communities. Thank you for giving me the time to add that.
Nia, there was a question there, and thank you for talking about ALEC, because ALEC has been a fixture for the last 15 years or so, and they were the ones who brought us SB 1070 in Arizona back in 2010, and just started, and they have a whole lot of different corporations as a part of it. And you're right, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. The question is, could you share what type of fight back is being organized against these bills in various states?
So I think that the thing is, I don't think folks, I think they're fighting back against the bills, right? Of course, I haven't been throughout the whole like state, like United States, to know what the fight back is, but I think that folks are like attacking these bills on an individual level, and And I do think that we really need to spotlight the people that are creating the bills, the people that are making the bills. And also, you know, ALEC has been around for 50 years. They've been around since Ronald Reagan, right? I believe that they've come about because of like the struggle that came out of the 60s and the 70s. And so they were probably birthed because more regulations and laws and rules had to be put on us. So the thing about them is that they're secretive in a way that it's really hard to pinpoint immediately when they're sending out these new legislations that they have created, right? Sometimes they do it, they'll put their, like, as you've seen in the documentary, if you've seen 13th, is that they'll just scratch off ALEC, right? And then they'll put in the name of the state or the legislator, the assembly member, and then they'll just throw it into the state's house. So they're sneaky, but I also think that like we can also follow them and understand them a little more. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
I see Jamie's got their hand raised. Jamie's gonna go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to keep building on this because I think it's right on, and it's I am with a small group of folks that are trying to look at these anti-abortion you know, bills that are trigger laws that are going into place and everything. And there's a lot of solidarity that folks, you know, want to engage in and fight back, especially folks, I mean, that are local here. And the idea of boycott started to come up. And so I, you know, in this space too, it's a young space. And I was like, okay, well, we need to do some research, but everything that you're saying right now is really resonating. Not only, you know, the fact that it's tied into all fights of folks, you know, wanting bodily autonomy and being attacked for gender and for sexuality and just for freedom, you know, but yeah, the idea of looking at who these corporations, and I mean, part of it was trying to, like, the idea of the boycott was great, and I was like, okay, that's cool, but like, why and who and how, and this kind of point to ALEC, I think, is really important, and also who they're funding and who is getting money to create these bills as a way to like, is there a way, and I guess this is all like new, this is new, and the kind of fight back that I'm thinking about right now, but is there a way to sanction a state? And I mean, I know, Hamid, we had conversations about what happened in Arizona with where there was like sanctions, I don't know if sanctions or protests against certain corporations. But I'm just kind of wondering, like, how do we get, is there a way to sanction like these states to kind of get them in a chokehold? I don't know how else to talk about it, but I appreciate this kind of reference to ALEC and understanding what that corporation does, and kind of needing to educate ourselves more on like this movement of money.
Maybe one of the ways to look at it, this also is that the more than that, it's really been the big push going back, going back to almost Richard Nixon, almost 50 years or so, about the issue of states' rights and how a whole lot of control over our bodies in so many different ways has been kind of just shifted. And that was the whole thing, because what has happened is, and it's interesting to look at Roe v. Wade, because that wasn't even on the table. it was a Mississippi law that was on the table that the Supreme Court was supposed to rule on about 15 weeks of pregnancy. And then they just took it a step further and then ruled on overturning Roe v. Wade as well by giving states the rights for access to abortion or not. So I think there's, whether the federal government can sanction, I think there's definitely sanctioning on the state as well. But how those authorities are being now shifted, you talked about the state and religion, for example, how that has been impacted, about gun possession, that has been impacted. Now they're going after voting rights, and that has been impacted. So they're going to be taking that up in their next, term as well. So I think it's more or less. I really don't know the answer to your question, Jamie, whether the state can be sanctioned by the federal government, but the state definitely.
No, I'm not talking about the
violates.
federal government. I'm talking about the people.
Yeah, well, the people can always, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're building that power on the ground. That's where, for example, I just used the example of SB 1070, that very draconian immigration law. It was the whole movement. It came down in Arizona, and they were fighting the Derechos Humanos and some of those groups on the ground. Now there are many other groups too, like Mi Gente and some other groups. But some of the original groups out there in these fights, they were the ones who were very successful in pushing back and stopping, but they used different tools as well. And then people across the country were also taking actions as well. There were shutdowns of the federal building over here. There was, so several things happened. So I think it's a matter of just movement building and how we build that conversation.
Yeah, I do agree with the movement building stuff, right? Like we got to know our enemy, and we got to get our people to know who the enemy is, how to shift and move, because I spoke about Alec in Tucson, and only a few people knew of them. So I think we should definitely see who the players are, not just like the ones that are in the front, but the people in the back as well that are regulating.
Yeah, I was even starting to think we need to call on big venues, calling out, musicians, calling out people that are even, making money in these states now to divest their money from these states. It needs to be a complete, I don't know, that's what because it feels like it's becoming where do you live now? Because these certain states are not places that you want to go. And not that I want to and then so I started thinking half you don't want to make it hard for people who live there that are trying to make money, that their work depends on that economy. But at the same time, you have to what are the options? And a movement building is one thing, but I think a lot of people are looking for direction right now into doing something. And so I guess for me, in this small group, we're starting to kind of boycott buying. Start the end of the month, do a complete boycott of buying anything for a month, increasing mutual aid at the end of the month for when the check runs out. But then I was like, okay, well, we need to kind of look more into what the BDS movement was, what the anti-apartheid movement was, and look at, I love this idea of cross actions, Hamid, that you were saying, direct actions that are being organized with a call to say these states, we cannot participate in the allowing these legislators, these senators to kind of continue to be supported by various corporations that are donating monies to their campaigns. All that needs to be called out, needs to be made public. And so, yeah, so I guess that's why I really appreciate this kind of discussion around Alec, because I think that's part of what we're trying to find is where the reproductive justice movement is going and the diversity of tactics. So in the sense of what direct actions are kind of that we can build with, and then of course we're doing that research. But yeah, anyway, so just wondering if that kind of conversation is starting to be had when we think about these anti-trans laws and these anti-abortion laws that are being passed.
I also think about those southern states as where a lot of the movement and people power have been organized around, and I feel like it's rarely kind of spoken about. So I'm wondering how we can amplify local organizations that are, right now, I think overwhelmed with so many people going to them because um, I feel like before Roe v. Wade was overturned, they had like a consistent base of folks who were already excluded from accessing abortion because of local laws or because of inaccessibility. So I've also seen like you were saying, Jamie, like a lot of folks trying to really mobilize right now in this moment because it's angering and so activating. And unfortunately, I feel like so many people's go-to is just donating to Planned Parenthood instead of like critically looking at what are the local resources that are available to folks on the ground right now, right? That have been doing harm reduction, have been connecting folks to networks of either like logistical information of how to travel through other states, money for that, right? Very material, I guess, resources that they provide for folks that are in need of abortions. The Abortion Fund Collective, which was spearheaded.
I'm throwing this out there, and please let me know if I'm totally off or wrong about it, but I can't help but like think about the ways in which the Great Replacement movement that is coming about, and how these legislators and politicians are really trying to like control stuff also tied to a lot of these like really conservative ideas about gender and specifically transgender youth, right? That there's this mainstream idea that like these like gender transition is also taking away the white race, right? That like people, like trans people actually transitioning and taking bodily autonomy, like, because I know that my hormone medication, right, is I go through when I'm dealing with medical insurance and I get my hormone shots, like it is also tied to reproductive rights. And so I have to constantly speak with like the insurance company and like speak with my doctor. It's like a whole cycle. And this is here in California, right? So I can't help but like connect those things that are happening, right? Because these conversations about the Great Replacement theory, like white people being like the minority in like 2050 or so, I don't know what the date was, but I wonder if this is them. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I've read some really interesting things about how transness gets, or how anti-transness is really just stemming from anti-Blackness. Similarly to fat phobia stemming from anti-Blackness and, folks who are like ableist also tying it back to anti-Blackness. So really thinking about how gender, transness, queerness is almost seen as something that's not white, right? Or like you were saying, threatens this legacy of whiteness and either white femininity or white masculinity, no in between and no variance. So it's really interesting seeing these attacks and how they're really meant to preserve, like you said, what Audre Lorde like labeled as the mythical norm of like being the normal citizen of this country, which is like white, middle class, cis, a right Christian man. And anything that doesn't fall into that gets punished, either through, you know, intra-community violence or through the state. So yeah, I just really wanted to bring in how enslavement and colonization always kind of influence our ideas about gender, queerness, and transness, and how those things are always seen as outside of an acceptable form of whiteness. Not to say that white trans people and white queer people experience racism or anything in connection to that, but I guess I think about the connections of what it means to be non-white and what it means to be queer and how those are oftentimes collapsed. But yeah, looking more so, I guess, or I'm interested in how we can, I guess, connect our fights, because so many folks see, as you were saying, as individual fights, as independent of each other, when in reality, right, they're all infringing on bodily autonomy and difference, essentially. So I guess thinking about how we can form alliances in terms of power, not necessarily, like when I think of organizing with folks, you know, I don't want to organize with gentrifiers or white queers because my experiences with them are very different. And also, you know, historically, the Combahee River Collective has said a bunch of things of how we can't separate race from class and gender and sexuality. So I guess, I don't know. Yeah, I'm with you all. Trying to envision something material, something strong to respond back, but it's definitely difficult. And I'm not sure if we don't have Shella or Mariela or Ni, but myself, Hamid and Matios were at the action, the Queer Apocalypse action. And I think that was really telling of how disconnected WeHo and like white gays specifically are to any movement, right? I feel like this whole homonormativity of how, you know, the Ellen DeGenereses and like the acceptable white queers are now becoming part of a power structure. And it was just so heartbreaking seeing them cut across, right, this action that was meant to center Black trans women. And we like had a poster that said, you know, the history of Stonewall, the history of Pride was a riot. Black trans women were at the forefront of, you know, fighting for your rights. And this is how you know, have no respect, no sense of solidarity or connection. So it was really heartbreaking, but it was also very telling to see. And now it makes sense why WeHo made their Grand Marshal a sheriff. Matios or Hamid, did you all have any observations that you wanted to share about the action, or anyone else that I don't know that was at the action?
No, just that, you know, Chella and everyone who organized it, Kim, Mariela, me, y'all nurtured such a loving and festive space that somehow concurrently was ferocious and present in a very defiant way. And it was just so powerful to be there. And I'm so grateful we held that. And I also want to uplift the, you know, the clear surveillance from the sheriff's department to that particular action. So there was, you know, plenty of festivities going on, but the sheriff's department, the deputies were stationed up on a roof looking right at us. Just, I think, which is so telling about, it all. But it was a great action.
I could just want to add, building upon that, is that, you know, this goes back to one of the first fights that got the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition mobilizing and organizing as well is the National Suspicious Activity Reporting Program. And, behavioral surveillance is at the center of a lot of surveillance now that is happening. So how these laws are now being instituted, and even with the way that program is set up is that it considers taking photographs in public, using video cameras in public, drawing diagrams of a building, just as which would be, supposedly constitutionally protected activity is considered suspicious activity. So, and then a file is opened, a person is investigated, they send this information over to fusion centers, which are mega spy centers where warehouse all our information. Then they see if there is any nexus to criminal activity or to terrorism, and on and on and on. One of its companion programs, which you all may have seen, the taglines or information bulletins is "See something, say something." And in LA, it's called iWatch, small I and capital WATCH. So "See something, say something" is about community informants. So, and thinking about Texas law, for example, about restricting abortion or access to abortion, that how a citizen supposedly can go and pick up and sue an abortion provider. So now as these are expanding, we are going to see, and it's almost ironic that, and I don't know, well, Jamie has been there for the longest time. So I guess, Jamie, you do remember that how we were speaking about these things back then, that this is how it's going to expand. And it's sadly, that's exactly like, just the whole playbook is unfolding. So I think as we are organizing as well, which goes back to the coalition's basic premise about know your fight, it's really critical for us to know that what are the tools and these programs of harm that are very active as well. So yeah, so how are we even, and what are we even organizing for as well? So how are we building with reproductive health groups and other groups as well, that, as you're building power, these are the various ways that, that people are being criminalized. These are the various ways that a trans youth is being, because of their behavior, is being surveilled, which would then be further criminalized. And then, so that's one. The second one is, we did a town hall back in the end of March in LA on the whole social media monitoring and social network analysis. So social media monitoring, and going back to Kim, what you were saying earlier about these sites, about tracking your menstrual cycles and various other things. So how people are even speaking to each other. And of course, the other thing that we always lift is that we are here to build power and not paranoia, but yet at the same time to be fully informed as to where our fight is. So these are the things that, at least in service to the community and building that movement, that the Stop LAPD Spying can very effectively offer to building solidarity and movement as well, in lifting these and awareness in the community about what are the ways that harm will come at us. So then what is our defense? Well, what kind of defense are we building? And that's what community defense is all about. So in addition to the mutual aids and everything else as well. Thank you.
So speaking of defense, just to do a little pivot, me as well as the rest of the gender and sexuality group folks, Hamid, and the US Prostitutes Network, as well as Swap LA, has been interested in looking at data of how the criminalization of sex workers happened, particularly in or during the Super Bowl. So NE, as well as US Pros, worked very diligently, right, to submit a public records request to get those materials and really think about, how did the police start thinking about doing these sweeps and raids to target sex workers, with their whole premise being about human trafficking. How, did they get anyone involved or that was being trafficked? So we were asking for all these data points, and we received little to nothing that is useful. And while we are working on following up with that, there is a meeting Thursday. Where did I write this down? Thursday at 12:30. And it'll be a meeting with folks to think about how we could move forward with those PRA requests. Yes, Nancy.
Hello, everyone. This is my first meeting with Stop LAPD Spying. I'm a pretty engaged SWAP LA member and currently still a sex worker, but also working for a nonprofit. And so sometimes I'm in like the meetings, the webinars, or the trainings. And what you just said, Kim, I believe, sorry, I'm on my phone. Yes, Kim. So there's this group, I just wanted to uplift this little bit of information in case it helps in what you're discussing at the moment. There's a group called CSAT, Convenience Stores Against Trafficking. And they are the organization, it's like white Christian anti-human trafficking, in quotes, organization here in LA that's very well funded. And I think they're the org that worked with LAPD specifically in the Super Bowl last year and coordinated a lot of the sweeps and supposed like follow-up services. They're kind of a new organization, but yeah, I just wanted to add that in case it helps you find those data points. So it's Convenience Stores Against Trafficking.
Wow, thank you so much. Tiff, as well as some other folks from Stop LAPD Spying, have been really looking and combing through LAPD's meetings, and I don't think we've seen this Convenience Stores Against Trafficking ever pop up, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you so much for that, Nancy. But yeah, we are trying to build a report about this. If folks aren't familiar, LAPD uses a narrative around human trafficking and sex trafficking to really justify an increase of resources to come and criminalize what results in materially being Black trans women who are most affected by being criminalized of sex work. So we are trying to investigate how it is that LAPD started these raids, what were they doing in preparation, just so we could get an idea of how they'll be operating during the Olympics, which are coming up. So we're trying to implement how sex workers are one of vulnerable folks that are part of this abolitionist ecosystem, if that makes sense. I myself only have experience with, well, just kidding, with a lot of online sex work. So even thinking about the attacks that go on with online sex work, like FOSTA and SESTA, and constant attacks that are happening. We have, what's it called, Zoom bombing, right? For us, even as organizations, as coalitions that try to talk about these topics, similar hacking and other forms of policing online happen to sex workers where they're either doxxed, stalked, or a variety of things happen to them. So I feel like part of our gender and sexuality group has been really bringing and uplifting sex workers' voices on how the surveillance state affects us on the ground, and also, if they come for you, if they come for me today, they'll be coming for you tomorrow type of deal, as Hamid and Jamie were talking about, seeing all of these things unfold slowly, and just coming after community after community. So if you're interested in that, we are starting a working group and trying to meet more regularly. And again, the next meeting will be Thursday at 12:30. If you're interested, let me put my email down and I could forward them to me. Or I could just do the Stop LAPD Spying email. But does anyone have any questions on that fight? Thank you. Okay.
Can I just quickly add to that, Kim, just as a part of also information and awareness as well? So what is happening is that there's a whole process that was started back in the late 1990s, and of course, the great liberal champion Bill Clinton's time. It's called NSSC, National Security Special Events, which bring in a whole lot of different agencies as a result of, and it started in the aftermath of the Atlanta Olympics when there was some bombing over there as well. So what it does is it brings in Homeland Security, Secret Service, the FBI, the Department of Justice, local law enforcement agencies and all of that, where they kind of come in and pretty much take over the city. So they say that any event that is of domestic or international significance will be deemed as a national security special event. It used to be that it would only be around presidential visits or even, just when they have these every 4 years with the election where the parties meet and all of that, conventions. But now it's been expanded to a lot of different events as well. So we will see the impact, just the criminalization of people running rampant. People are gearing up for the Olympics in 28, but then the World Cup soccer is going to be happening. Every year there's going to be other major events that are going on as well. So sex workers are usually one of the primary targets who are then kind of listed for or targeted for, more persecution and all of that stuff. So just wanted to throw that in there as well. So I think our buildup is really towards kind of exposing that and these partnerships as well.
Okay, I think Nee had something about safety tips and recent protests and Watch the Watchers. I don't know if Hamid, you could speak to any of those.
Yeah, we have some videos that are posted on our website as well. They're called Watch the Watchers, They Lie, and then Watch the Watchers, They Still Lie. And it's so we are looking to build, and those are now 5 or 6 years old, where we would go out and post cameras on law enforcement agencies during rallies, during marches, and to document the various units that would be in place. We've outed on camera their informants and infiltrators as well. So now it's getting definitely much more heightened as well, because now they just announced about shadow teams. Shadow teams would be placed, they've been normalized as shadow teams, so they would be placed within our rallies and marches, undercover cops. Drone surveillance is now bringing in during political protests and all of that. That's going to be expanded as well. So that mission creep is on. So the goal is for us to come back and start organizing an updated version of Watch the Watchers. We haven't had a very detailed conversation about that yet, but that is something that the coalition wants to do. So, thank you for posting that. So, people are welcome to take a look at the video, see what they think. And we'd love to hear back comments as to how we can update these kind of, and this is also built on the long tradition, which was started at our home at LA CAN, at Los Angeles Community Action Network, which is Community Watch. So Community Watch has been really has led to a lot of expose of violent activities of the police, and also, just documenting that thing, which has led to, just laws being changed. For example, right now we're talking about gentrification of 4118D, which is now still 4118 now. But just how these laws were being used to constantly criminalize and harass people. But I think that was a model that was created to kind of put the how do we document that? But there's a whole process in that. So we do those trainings. I mean, a long answer to your question, but I just wanted to give some background and invite people, because we want to develop it collectively based on people's own lived experiences. if people are sex workers, if they're, just unhoused folks, or, just people, especially trans folks are very much impacted, just as a result of these things too. So we want to just make it, just in a way that it really addresses a lot of the different things, and it's more educational and informative. So people can, so it's all about what's our defense against these things.
Thank you so much, Hamid. Yeah, so as always, if you're interested in either of those, our email is stoplapdspine@gmail.com, and I'll just go, oh, just kidding. It's up there. Yeah, okay, so I think that is, yes, Pancake.
Pancake, would you like to make a comment? Maybe unmute yourself. You want to try unmuting, Pancake? Maybe there's some technical difficulties. Or feel free to post your comment in chat, Pancake, if you're being shy. I've never known Pancake to be shy.
Unless anyone has any other comments or questions, thank you all so much for joining us today. There's a bunch of things you could be doing, but we're here in community talking about very important things. And it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for...
Make a quick announcement about next Tuesdays.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Matthias, if you want to talk about the fight against the war on youth next Tuesday.
Yeah, so next week we'll be having our monthly webinar on the fight against the war on youth. Not entirely sure what it's going to be about, but we've been most recently, again, fighting against the Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant at City Council. So it'll probably be about that a little at the very least. So tune in.
And our link to our meeting calendar is in the chat. You all are welcome to attend any meetings. We are always a fun group, I promise. And yeah, thank you all so much for participating. See you all next month.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate it.